If the police have no duty to protect you, then why do taxpayers support the police? The reality is always cruel. In the United States, the police only protect the people, not the individuals. Today, we start from the movie The Pig, the Snake, and the Pigeon, and use the principle of economic analysis of law to talk about why the American justice, the police only have the responsibility to catch criminals after the crime, but do not have the obligation to protect you before the crime and during the case. Please follow me and subscribe to my channel. I'm eager to discuss ideas and reality with you and uncover the untold secrets. Economics is so cold that it doesn't have an ounce of warmth for personal preferences, let alone for morality. The core principle of economics is that everything has a cost. So does justice, or to be precise, the realization of justice, also have a cost. This raises a very real and brutal question for us. If you can pay the cost of justice, will justice leave you? Zhou Chu, courtesy name Xian, lived from the Three Kingdoms to the Western Jin dynasty in ancient China. His father was Zhou Fang, the governor of Poyang. Relying on his father's power, Zhou Chu threw his weight around. Once, he saw an elder in the country with a sad face. So he asked him why he was so miserable when the world was peaceful and this year was a good harvest year. The elder replied, "There are three evils in the world that are harming the country, so why should we be happy?" Zhou Chu asked what the three evils were, and the elder told him, the fierce tiger in the South Mountain, the dragon in the water, and Zhou Chu in the country. So Zhou Chu was determined to turn over a new leaf. First, he killed the tiger in the southern mountain. Then, he got rid of the dragon in the water, and he reformed himself. This story was known as Zhou Chu eradicates the three scourges. Zhou Chu later joined the army and was very successful in battle. Finally, he was framed and martyred for his country. Nowadays, there is a Zhouwang temple in Yixing, Wuxi, Jiangsu province, dedicated to Zhou Chu. In 2023, the movie The Pig, the Snake, and the Pigeon was released in Taiwan. The movie depicts the story of a wanted criminal, Chen Gillen, who, after learning that he has terminal lung cancer, goes to the police station to prepare to turn himself in, only to find out that he is ranked third on the most wanted list. Thus, Chen Gillen prepares to leave a big name at the end of his life. Imitating the ancient Zhou Chu, he kills ranked first and ranked second wanted criminals on the wanted list and then turns himself in. Taiwanese movies have come a long way in recent years, producing many great films. Many people attribute this to Taiwan's free environment. In fact, freedom alone is no guarantee of bringing good art. That good art can also come from tough times. Zhao Yi, courtesy name Yin Song, was a literary scholar and historian of the Qing dynasty. He lived at a time when the French Revolution was in full swing, and Napoleon subsequently rode through Europe. His poem The Misery of a Country is the luck of poets illustrates the relationship between art and the times.
Facing records of two dynasties, Athenian man experienced the rise and fall of dynasties and the catastrophe of the world. To avoid being aggrieved by the government, he followed ancient recluses. Reading histories bitterly, he thought that had been lost by the descendants. Orchids in the royal vacation palace wept to the night fire. Trees in each one's home country wailed in autumn winds. The misery of a country is the luck of poets. Perfect lines will come when poets make see the vicissitudes of the world.
Of course, movies are the art of kill money. The massive entry of international capital and the vigorous development of the global market are the main driving forces behind the development of Taiwan's cinema. On February 3, 2024, Netflix took the exclusive rights to the film on streaming platforms and broadcast it exclusively around the world on March 1 of the same year. Everything has a cost. and this movie tells us that 1. Government is the least efficient. 2. Justice has a cost. In the movie The Pig, the Snake, and the Pigeon, the 3 wanted criminals on the wanted list were still at large for many years. In the end, it was only through the repentance and self-awareness of one of them that they finally paid the price in blood for their crimes. That is not just a story, but a cruel reality. Economics tells us that government is the least efficient. We know that it takes people to do everything, and people are self-interested. People do things with individual inputs and outputs in mind. When the police arrest a murderer, it's a fight for the murderer's life. For the murderer, success is life, while failure is death. But for the police, success is just a certificate plus some bonus, while failure is a loss of his life. This input-output ratio is grossly disproportionate. That's why police officers who chase criminals with their lives are basically something you only see in movies and almost never exist in reality. The reason why I say basically is that when a case may involve the personal interests of a police officer, there are police officers who fight for their lives. In the movie The Pig, the Snake, and the Pigeon, the desperate good cop fights criminals regardless of life and death and dares to follow the protagonist criminals to fall from a height. In return, the result of one eye being stabbed and blinded. In reality, do you think there would be a police who would pay such a price for a paper reward? In reality, police officers protect themselves first and foremost. Under safe and secure conditions, they rely on collective cooperation and modern technology to fight crime. For this reason, the cost of police work is very high. For the government, the owner is the illusory state, and the enforcer of rights is the employee. The employee's primary concern is necessarily his own interests. Another day, another dollar. That is why governments are always less efficient than individuals. Even so, we have had to resort to governmental forms of organization for many things, such as law enforcement. The root cause is that not everyone can afford to pay the cost of justice. That is to say, in protecting the rights of individuals to life, property, etc. We have to adopt an insurance mechanism that shares the costs. Let everyone in society pay the total cost of social justice. This is the price of justice. But unfortunately, the insurance of justice is not the best mechanism, and it often fails. Miriam Douglas and her 4-year-old daughter lived on the second floor of a shared house at 1112 Lamont Street Northwest in the District of Columbia. Carolyn Warren and Joan Taliaferro lived on the third floor. In the early morning of Sunday, March 16, 1975, 2 men, Marvin Kent and James Morse, broke into the room. Kent forced Douglas to perform oral sex on him, and Morse then raped her. Warren and Taliaferro heard cries for help coming from downstairs, and Warren called 911. The operator told her to be quiet and assured her that the police would immediately go to assist. Metropolitan Police Department headquarters logged a burglary reported by Warren at 6:23 a.m. Officers patrolling Main Street were notified at 6:26. 4 cruisers responded to the broadcast, 3 of which went to Lamont Street. After making the phone call, Warren and Taliaferro climbed through a window onto an adjacent roof and waited for the police to arrive. There, they saw one police officer drive through the alley behind their house and drive all the way to the front of the residence without stopping or peeking out the window to inspect. A second officer knocked on the front door but left without receiving a response. At 6:33 a.m., all 3 officers left the scene 5 minutes after their arrival. Warren and Taliaferro returned to the room. They heard Douglas' persistent screams and called the police again. The police again assured them that help was on the way. The second call, received at 6:42 a.m., was recorded as simply investigating trouble, so no police responded at all. Thinking that the police would arrive soon, Warren and Taliaferro called for Douglas, presumably also trying to scare off the intruders. After finding them both, the intruders, Kent and Morse, forced the three women at knife point to go with them to Kent's apartment. Over the next 14 hours, the captive women were robbed, beaten, and forced to accept sexual favors from Kent and Morse. After the incident, Warren, Taliaferro, and Douglas sued the District of Columbia and the Metropolitan Police Department for negligence, but the trial court ruled against them. They again took their lawsuit to the Court of Appeals, and ultimately, the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, in a 4-3 decision, upheld the trial court's judgment based on the public duty doctrine, which ruled that the duty to provide public services is owed to the public at large, and, absent a special relationship between the police and an individual, no specific legal duty exists. Chinese people should be particularly familiar with this ruling, which means, we serve the people, not you. Due to the case law adopted by the United States, this precedent has far-reaching effects and directly influenced another judgment. That is, in 1999, Simon shot 3 daughters of his and Jessica. Jessica Linehan Gonzalez, a resident of Castle Rock, Colorado, filed for a mandatory restraining order against her husband, Simon, during their divorce proceedings. On June 4, 1999, the permanent restraining order was granted, which provided that Simon was prohibited from coming within 100 yards, 91 meters, of one of Jessica's sons and 3 of her daughters outside of designated visitation hours. On June 22, at approximately 5:15 p.m., Simon removed the 3 girls in violation of the order. Jessica called the police at 7:30 p.m., 8:30 p.m., and 10:10 p.m. on June 22, and at about 0:15 a.m. on June 23. She went to the police station in person at 0:40 a.m. on June 23. No action was taken by the police. At approximately 3:20 a.m. on June 23, Simon appeared at the Castle Rock Police Department and was killed in a shootout with police. During a search of his vehicle, the police officers found the bodies of his 3 daughters and determined that 3 daughters had been killed before arriving at the police station. The police did not find a cause of death and could not confirm the time and place of death. Gonzalez sued the city of Castle Rock, Colorado, the city's police department, and 3 police officers with whom she had spoken in the United States District Court, pursuant to 42 U.S.C. A 1983, claiming a federally protected property interest in the enforcement of the restraining order and alleging that an official policy or custom of failing to respond properly to complaints of restraining order violations. This suit went all the way to the Court of Appeals before losing anyway. Justice David Souter wrote a concurring opinion on the grounds that enforcement of a restraining order is a process, not the interests protected by the process, and that there is not due process protection for processes. The case eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court 6 years later. In the end, the Supreme Court ruled against Jessica by an overwhelming 8-1 margin, on the grounds that the police have no affirmative constitutional duty to protect the personal property of a citizen, unless a special custodial relationship exists between the two. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who authored the Supreme Court's decision, insisted that the spirit of the Constitution is in its text, and that there is no positive language prescribing governmental action or implying any positive civil rights. According to the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. According to Scalia, this phrase uses negative words such as not and deny, without any positive language specifying what duties the government should have. Therefore, the amendment can be interpreted as no duty to protect. No duty to protect states to American citizens that fundamental principle of American law that a government and its agents are under no general duty to provide public services, such as police protection, to any individual citizen. In 2011, the lawsuit was submitted to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, IACUR, which is composed of representatives of members of the Organization of American States. The United States became a full member by ratifying a charter document, which is itself a treaty. Ultimately, the Commission found that the state failed to act with due diligence to protect Jessica Linehan and her daughters, Leslie, Catherine, and Rebecca Gonzalez from domestic violence, which violated the state's obligation not to discriminate and to provide for equal protection before the law. The Commission also stated that the failure of the United States to adequately organize its state structure to protect the Gonzalez girls from domestic violence was discriminatory and constituted a violation of their right to life. The principle of no duty to protect declares that the government is not the enforcer of justice, but the final arbiter of litigation and equity. The government does not actively intervene in any action between individuals, but only adjudicates when an individual files a lawsuit. In the case of the police, their duty is not to prevent crime, but to apprehend criminals after a crime and commit them to the court. The government is an enforcer of judgments, but even then, it is not an active enforcer of all judgments, such as mandatory restraining orders. If you see a police officer on the street, grinning as he watches two suspects shooting at each other, it's like watching a blockbuster shootout, until one of them goes down. He smirks and says to the other one, "Please put your hands up." This is really legal in America. That's why Americans say, you have to be a ward of the state for them to be your bodyguards. No duty to protect is only a principle of American law, not of the laws of other countries. In the vast majority of countries in the world, including Europe, Asia, and so on, the law provides that the police have a duty to protect the property and lives of citizens. Even in the UK, the progenitor of case law, there is a duty on the police to protect the public and prevent crime. Crime prevention is a positive duty. In Scotland, it is laid down pretty clearly in Section 20 of the Police and Fire Reform, Scotland Act 2012 subsection 1, c.
1. It is the duty of a constable, a. to prevent and detect crime, b. to maintain order, c. to protect life and property, d. to take such lawful measures and make such reports to the appropriate prosecutor as may be needed to bring offenders with all due speed to justice, e. where required, to serve and execute a warrant, citation, or deliverance issued, or process duly endorsed by a Lord Commissioner of Justiciary, Sheriff, Summary Sheriff or Justice of the Peace, in relation to criminal proceedings, and f. to attend court to give evidence.
One of the major reasons for the principle of no duty to protect in the United States law is the cost of law enforcement. As we all know, the law is universally applicable, and no exceptions should be made for individual cases. The police will have multiple considerations in every execution of their duties, the most important of which is the protection of their own personal safety. Their judgment of the real situation at the scene also varies from person to person. This leads to the fact that when carrying out their duties, the police will decide on actions according to their own discretion. and these actions will certainly lead to different results. If a lawsuit is brought against the police simply because of the difference in passable outcomes, the police and the government will be sued into bankruptcy. In Simon's suit in 1999, the plaintiffs demanded damages amounting to $30 million. In addition, if such a lawsuit is allowed, the United States government will be forced to devote a great deal of human and financial resources to dealing with judicial proceedings. At the same time, the legal and moral risks borne by the police are so great that no one would be willing to take on this responsibility, which would result in no one wanting to be a police officer. The law is always a holistic system, so it is difficult to make comparisons between different countries regarding separate legal provisions. The Chinese government, for example, has adopted the principle of positive protection. This is based on the fact that it is very difficult for individuals to bring lawsuits against the government and claim compensation. For Chinese citizens, the cost is too high, and even if they win, the amount of compensation, benefits, is too small. The opposite is true in the United States. Justice has a cost. Reducing the cost of justice is an essential issue in the law-making process, but never publicized in the law. Justice that can pay its costs can be achieved. It's only justice on paper. Justice delayed is justice denied, and justice that cannot be paid its price either. Then, how to build a justice-oriented society as far as possible becomes a problem that every individual has to face. The justice society here includes not only the government, but also each individual, through several principles to build up as completely as possible justice system. So far, the market-based solution of justice is probably the most efficient one that human beings can find. The marketization of justice means that, as far as possible, the market will make available to each individual a hierarchical and diverse range of options for the implementation of justice. It is up to each individual to make his or her own choices. This includes bounty hunters who offer their services privately, class action lawsuits to reduce costs, individual gun ownership, and even the private law practice of arauchi, meaning vendetta in Japanese.
I'd rather rely on my 1911 than trust my life to 911.
In ancient times, private vengeance, carried out by blood relatives of the victim, existed all over the world. This form of revenge was legal in many countries and regions. In Japan, vengeance was institutionalized in the Edo period. Not only the blood relatives of the victim, but also masters and servants, such as the samurai of the daimyo, could take revenge for the daimyo. The legislation of the Edo shogunate provided that the perpetrator of a murder was to be punished by the public authorities, the shogunate and the clan. However, if the perpetrator disappeared and the public authorities were unable to punish him, retaliation was permitted by entrusting the punishment to the victim's relatives. It is also prohibited for those who have been killed in a vendetta to engage in counter-vendetta. On February 14, 1984, Jeffrey Doucet, a 25-year-old karate instructor, kidnapped a student, 11-year-old Jody, and took him to a motel in Anaheim, California, where he sexually assaulted and molested him. Then Doucet allowed the boy to collect calls to his mother from the motel. So California police raided the motel and arrested Doucet on February 29. It was only afterward that it was learned that Doucet had been sexually abusing the boy for at least a year. On March 16, 1984, Doucet was flown back to Louisiana for trial. He arrived at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport around 9:30 p.m. and was led through the airport by police in handcuffs. Jody's father, Leon Gary Plotch, was talking to a close friend in front of a row of payphones at this time, and as Doucet passed by, Plotch drew his gun and fired, killing the child rapist, Doucet, instantly. Plotch was sentenced in 1989 to 7 years suspended sentence, with 5 years probation and 300 hours of community service. A similar case occurred in Germany on May 5, 1980, when 7-year-old Anna, after an argument with her mother, Marianne Bachmeier, skipped school. She was kidnapped and sexually assaulted by her neighbor, 35-year-old butcher Klaus Grabowski, who eventually strangled Anna with a pair of his fiancée's tights. On March 6, 1981, at about 10 o'clock, the third day of the trial, Bachmeier fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Grabowski, killing him in courtroom 157 of the Lübeck District Court. On November 2, 1982, Bachmeier was charged in court with murder. On March 2, 1983, she was convicted by the Circuit Court Chamber of the District Court of Lübeck of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a weapon, and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for the combination of these 2 charges. Bachmeier was released after serving 3 years of her sentence. Although the laws of contemporary countries do not support vendettas, the results of the above 2 judgments, both of which were lenient, indirectly recognize the justice of vendettas. The Auto-da-fé vendetta itself is a way to reduce the cost of law enforcement to the government. Although the criminals in both cases have been arrested, the subsequent trial, incarceration, and recidivism costs associated with being released are enormous. One of them, Grabowski, was sentenced to chemical castration for sexually assaulting 2 girls prior to the Anna case. However, he later underwent hormone therapy privately in order to reverse the castration. In the United States, a bounty hunter is a private agent who works for a bail bondsman to capture fugitives or criminals for a commission or bounty. The official name of this profession is bail enforcement agent or fugitive pursuit agent. So, can a bounty hunter represent a fugitive? The American movie True Grit depicts the story of Maddie Ross, a 14-year-old girl who hires Rooster Cogburn to avenge her father's death. Of course, the movie reacts to the Western era of the United States over 100 years ago. Today, few countries in the world support vendettas because private law will undermine the principle of justice. Justice without trial undermines justice itself. Governments are necessarily inefficient, and police enforcement prioritizes the police's own interests. Citizens, on the other hand, must pay the cost of obtaining justice. If individuals cannot afford to pay the cost of justice, then justice is only paper justice. Therefore, how to establish an efficient social justice system has always troubled human beings. In all these cases, we can only hope for the gradual improvement of a self-generated and spontaneous order by social evolution. Please follow me and share my video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so we can work together to uncover the hidden truths of our society on ideas and reality. We can also explore the mysterious perceptions of ancient human beings and ideas and myths together.
Life is beautiful, but with all the beauty, someone is paying the price.